Lorraine Malach's Exultation as Transformation. Exultation, also called Exultation of St. Francis into Heaven, is a monumental figurative mural installed in 1981 as a reredos in Holy Family Notre Dame Parish Church, Port Alberni, BC. Created by the feminist Catholic artist Lorraine Malach, this example of sacred modern ceramic art offers an opportunity to consider its social and political agency within the context of its commission, installation, style, iconography, and location. Exultation originated within the context of particular Franciscan and Catholic celebratory anniversaries, as well as Vatican II's call for the renewal of the Church. However, it was made by an artist who chafed at the Church's restrictive roles for women and installed in a community confronted by economic, social, and environmental challenges. By examining Exultation's Franciscan iconography, its lively composition, and figurative abstraction in light of its place, space, and site, I propose this artifact co-shapes its use and representation. This stoneware reredos, fired with gloss and matte glazes in shades of white, blue, browns, and yellows, is cemented onto the sanctuary wall of a modern and modest 1957 parish church. Designed by Victoria architect John de Castri, the church was built under the auspices of the Franciscan Brotherhood, who in 1949 founded Port Alberni's first French Catholic parish, Notre Dame des Victoires. This parish was established in response to the large number of Francophone workers and their families who had moved to the area from Quebec and the prairies during the post-war lumber boom. Under the Franciscans of Western Canada, Notre Dame fused with Port Alberni's English Holy Family Parish in 1971. Franciscan history forms the basis of the iconographic program of the mural, where a choir and orchestra of angels surround St. Francis of Assisi and his monks. Franciscan parish priest Father Sigismund Lajoie commissioned Exultation from Lorraine Malach, a well-known Regina painter and ceramist, to celebrate his 25 years in church service. The mural was paid for through the congregation's fundraising efforts. Malach, who called herself a Franciscan, had formed close friendships with many of the Western Franciscans for whom she had already made several murals. In the 1981 dedication of Exultation, Lajoie specifically mentioned the financial contributions and efforts of hundreds of parishioners, families, and friends, as well as the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic Women's League, the Prayer Group, the Club Canadien Français, the Franciscan Brothers of Western Canada, and the Parish Council. Father Lajoie's dedication of Exultation also mentioned events that cover vast temporal and geographical distances. The 800th anniversary of Francis of Assisi, the first Franciscan missionaries to arrive on Vancouver Island in 1788, all the bishops of Victoria Diocese, the Sisters of St. Anne, all priests who serve the Christian community in Port Alberni, and all the faithful Christians who have built this Catholic community to this very day. The connections constructed in the dedication were particularly important in reinforcing both the local and global Catholic communities, as events in the secular world were ominous. Since the 1860s, Port Alberni's economy had been based on the lumber industry, which flourished during the 1940s to the late 1970s. Spurred by the 1942 establishment of the Port Alberni plywood plant. In 1980, after 3 decades of increasing wages, high employment, and relative affluence, the community was experiencing great unease as Macmillan Bladel, the city's principal employer, underwent another in a series of restructuring, and the global recession also took hold. Layoffs increased, and unemployment in the BC forestry industry was almost 20% when Exultation was mounted. The Holy Family Notre Dame Parish served this vulnerable working-class Port Alberni community. Installing Exultation was appropriate at this time, as a reredos traditionally not only served as an expression of gratitude, but historically depicted the miraculous deeds of a saint to whom the petitioner turned to in time of need. Parish fundraising was necessary to cover the mural's costs, which included materials and 18 months of intense labor for Malach. The mural, as potential, invited community solidarity, encouraging people to act together when they were threatened with economic disaster, the disruption of social connections, and as far as the church was concerned, potential deterioration of spiritual life. The fundraising effort facilitated the tightening of individuals' bonds with one another as they worked within and through established parish organizations, and also promoted inter-organizational cooperation, while participation of the Western Canada Franciscans tied the parishioners to a larger geographic community. These ties were also tightened when 2 parish volunteers transported the 200 boxes of sculpted ceramic tiles from Regina. The importance of this community event is reinforced through oral history, as well as the parish publicity pamphlet for church visitors, which describes the mural, to whom it is dedicated, and the artist's labor. As well, this information is available on the parish's website, which also features multiple images of details of Exultation. As reported in the local press, Exultation's dedication involved a large public celebration, reasserting the social and cultural value of the parish. For workers deemed irrelevant by the town's major employer, the revival of a monumental work by a reputable artist was self-affirming. The parishioners' vital role as part of a social and spiritual whole was emphasized when their critical function as workers within the second largest corporation in British Columbia was being undermined, and layoffs were conducted without consultation. The commissioning and dedication of this monumental mural looked to the future of the community, assuring it a place within a larger temporal and spatial context, and still celebrates this place through its story and material presence. The parish gave shape to Exultation through raising funds for its coming into being, which in turn shaped the community and its members. As Annie Guérin suggests, monuments made for the present look to the future as they celebrate the past. Co-constitution of the mural and its audience can also be understood by examining subsequent events directly related to its iconography, material, and formal expression. The mural's title, Exultation, a synonym for joy, or its French translation, La Joie, reminds the congregation of its dynamic and long-serving Franciscan parish priest, Sigismund La Joie. It also refers to St. Francis's 1225 experience of exultation, which inspired his celebrated composition, Canticle of the Creatures. Exultation illustrates this 9-stanza poem through depictions of the sun, moon, stars, and flowers, as well as the angelic choirs and musicians. The theme of celebration is communicated through compositional techniques that dissimulate the massiveness of 2 tons of clay. White rhythmical arcs of angels' wings dance across the mural's surface, and clusters of delicate golden flowers seemingly burst from the clay fabric. The glazed reflective surfaces are enhanced by natural light from the high sanctuary windows, electric lights, and altar table candles. Lively angel musicians whirl and twist beside the more staid Franciscan monks, grounded in earthly reality and subject to gravity. Exultation's audience cannot be left indifferent. Choirs sing, musicians play, angels twirl and tumble. The sky is torn asunder to reveal flowering jewels. Heaven and earth are both turned inside out. Its energy explodes into the church. As Malach explained, she made art to evoke a response. Stories about the mural testify to its ability to do just this. These include the standing ovation given by the congregation upon its unveiling, an older Italian-Canadian woman's joyous reaction who, weeping because of Exultation's beauty, went up to touch it, the tactile exploration of its surfaces by children after services, and the parish secretary's testimony of being able to meditate on it for long periods of time, quote, as it always has something to say, unquote. The physiognomy of the sculpted angels, which reference various world peoples, including Asian, Caucasian, and First Nations, the founding inhabitants of Port Alberni, invoked a particularly powerful emotional response in the internationally renowned guitarist Dennis Wilson, who was inspired to do a spontaneous benefit concert for the Third World. Father Lajoie emphasized in an interview, "There isn't a Sunday that goes by that it isn't doing something to people. It is not a static piece." However, Exultation's emotional agency also worked against it. Several years after its installation, a new Franciscan parish priest had curtains installed to cover it up for certain occasions, claiming it distracted the parishioners and inhibited his ability to perform his religious duties. The directives of Vatican II stated sacred art objects should be placed in a way that a true sense of proportion is observed, and could be removed from display if they lacked true artistic value or were out of keeping with divine worship. Malach, well versed in Vatican II, had considered Exultation entirely appropriate for its space, writing, "My difficulty was to produce something that was not going to get in the way and at the same time hold its own on the wall. It does. I am very pleased because it looks as if it has always been on the wall." By examining the mural within its spatial context, it is evident how the priest felt threatened. The figures are almost life-size, and thus from the congregation's perspective would appear to be approaching the size of the officiating priest, who is visually surrounded by a backdrop of angel choirs and musicians and served by Franciscan brothers. Photographic images of an officiating priest show he is visually dominant only due to his colored robes. No longer the focus of the sanctuary, he is but another player among many. As well, the dominant Franciscan presence would compete with priests from other orders. I also contend the patriarchal structure of the church is challenged by Malach's extended presence through the mural. Malach, a regular attendee at Mass who closely followed doctrinal issues, was also a feminist. In the mid-1970s in Regina, she attended a professional women's ecumenical lecture series on fundamental issues of faith. When the Anglican Church accepted ordination for women, she wrote she had wept for joy and could only hope that soon the Catholic Church would move in that direction. Malach later became annoyed with the clergy because of their sexist attitudes and railed against the marginalization of women and the male gendering of God. While this information implies Malach's intentionality in making a feminist statement, even without relying on this personal information, Exultation's agency can be understood as feminist. Women have an essential and rightful place in the Church and should be recognized within the sanctuary and through the rituals. Information about the mural in the parish pamphlet and website underscores this message. Through Exultation, a joyful female presence is implied during all aspects of the liturgy, framing the actions of the priest and perhaps competing with his words. As such, Exultation confronts deep gender rifts within the Catholic Church, and from a certain feminist point of view, attempts to heal them. Exultation's transformative agency can also be linked to the ecology movement through St. Francis. In the 1960s, ecologists, looking for historical inspiration, evoke Francis's relationship with the natural world, particularly as expressed in his almost pantheistic song, Canticle of the Creatures. Even those for whom the anthropocentrism of Christianity was a fundamental philosophical problem saw Francis as an exception. In his 1967 essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, Lynn White Jr. praised Francis for his egalitarian approach to all living things and for creating a veritable democracy of all God's creatures. Saint Francis of Assisi was declared the patron saint of ecology on Easter Sunday, 1980, by Pope John Paul II. In 1987, a reviewer of the deep ecology movement declared, Saint Francis was unique for attempting to divert mainstream Christianity back to a position of ecological equality. Franciscan values are regularly linked to ecology through comments such as, Francis, the patron saint of ecology, can help point us towards a community of creation in which humans take seriously the role of being lesser and subject to every creature because of God. Today, many Franciscan websites emphasize the ecological approach of St. Francis and the current commitment of the order to ecology and the social justice movement. While the ecological movement was not particularly active in Port Alberni when the mural was commissioned and installed, with the lumber industry's subsequent decline, the environmental problems associated with clear cutting and water and air pollution from the pulp and paper industry became increasingly apparent. The traditional salmon fishery was particularly affected. Exultation as a Franciscan mural could thus serve as inspiration for this Port Alberni parish struggling with severe ecological issues. In fact, since the 1990s, Port Alberni has reinvented itself based on ecotourism, including forest hiking and salmon fishing. The ravages of the lumber industry particularly affected Port Alberni's First Nations, who were also traumatized by Canada's infamous residential school system. This First Nation population includes the Hupatchaset and the Tsishat First Nations belonging to the Nucha-Nulth Tribal Council. Exultation's angels include reference to First Nations through their physiognomy, and for the Port Alberni audience, this must be understood as layered and fractious. On one hand, the ecology movement has problematically looked to the spirituality of Indigenous peoples for philosophical solution and spiritual inspiration. On the other, the Alberni Residential School, operated by the United Church and the federal government between 1895 and 1973, was notoriously abusive, driven by racial and colonial attitudes and policies. In Port Alberni, 3 mass graves of children associated with the former residential school have recently been located. A complaint by a former student, supported by 17 others, led to the 1993 conviction and sentencing of a school supervisor, spurring the RCMP to set up a Native residential school task force. Websites managed by First Nations survivors carry testimonials of the abuse suffered by generations of children at the Alberni school, and some stories have been entered into the provincial legislature's Hansard. It must be understood that generations of Port Alberni residents supplied goods and services to this school. Reconciliation within a post-colonial context has been attempted recently in Port Alberni to establish a dialogue between opposing camps. This involved a series of interviews with people who worked in the Alberni school. Some workers expressed a need to relieve their consciences and were regretful, while other former staff have found it difficult or impossible to re-examine their colonial attitudes towards First Nations. A similar range of attitudes would be expected to extend to the more peripherally involved larger Port Alberni community. The reference then to First Nations angels in Exultation takes on considerable significance for this parish, which formed part of a community that over several generations was implicitly involved in the Alberni school conditions. Layered upon this is the Catholic Church's involvement in other notorious Vancouver Island Indian residential schools. Recent Victoria Diocese newsletters indicate attempts at reconciliation regarding these other locations. Exultation's First Nation angels are therefore both emotionally evocative reminders of residential school abuse and potential agents for attitudinal change and reconciliation. Father Lajoie stated in a newspaper report that he hoped Exultation would act as an inspiration, as art should be, to bring people even closer together to work in harmony to solve the problems they encounter in the modern world. This paper demonstrates how Exultation does this. In the context of its space, place, and site, it has mitigated social alienation by building community solidarity, promoted and supported ecological solutions to environmental issues, addressed gender inequality within the Catholic Church, and compassionately confronted Canadian genocidal practices.